How you doing, Seafood?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Uh, Doing pretty good. It's like, a bit cloudy, a little gray here, but it's a lot cooler. It's not like, I don't know, it was like 80 something degrees, so like almost like 30 degrees Celsius here the other day. So, but other than that, I'm good. I
Yeah,
did
looks
have a
good.
question for you though.
Yeah, yeah.
I had a question. This is really like during my training, because I've been picking up when we last spoke about like just amount of time you put in training and stuff like that. I had a question. I was out in the city and I was just thinking about um if something would happen, heaven forbid anything like happens or to me, like I get attacked or whatever, but if that would happen, how would I know my stuff could work? I think we've talked about this in the past, but I want to talk specifically on neural systems or having it. I think we know we say neural systems. I could be wrong, but what does that actually mean, and how does that apply to like Chinese martial arts or any martial art in general? Is it like different for Chinese than like more traditional arts versus competition? Like, could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, the framework that I've adopted that I use is Jesse Glover's framework, which was develop your weapons, um, develop your delivery system, and then your counter interference system. And he had that. I never met him, but from what I know of him, he had that idea of the neural system, or at least that's what how he termed it. Um,
Hmm.
and I think it's just a fancy way of saying that whatever stuff that you train has to be in your body and accessible where you're not having to think. Like you're so well trained that you don't have to think about it, and you can move decisively and with precision. Um, kind of no matter the circumstance. There's a few examples that I use when I'm teaching people about the concept, but it's like everybody kind of knows
Hmm.
it's really basic, right? Like if you imagine like when you just first start driving a car, like when
Hmm.
you're, I don't know, 16 or something, and you get into the car and you're like kind of nervous, so you're like checking the mirror and adjusting the seat and checking you're doing all these different things. And it's not really familiar to you, and then okay, you've done your checklist, and then now you're like, oh, okay, I can turn the car on and I can kind of go and you know, th- there's like the energy of that. You're like a noob essentially, right?
Hmm.
And then you contrast that with somebody that's been driving for a really long time. They just get in the car, everything's kind of automatic. They can like eat a donut and like drink
Hmm.
something and like kind of be on the phone. Um, they can kind of do all that stuff at the same time and still drive like better than the person um,
Just started.
who just started, right? So that's kind of the same for Gung Fu, right? Most things are going to work if you train it to the point where, like, two things: if you train it to the point where somebody can't stop you,
Hmm.
right? So you are very, 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 very good at what you do, and then if you seize the opportunity to do it, right? Like if let's say
Okay.
I'm really, 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 really good at throwing, I don't know, like straight punches or something, right? I'm really, really,
Right.
really good at this. I know I've got speed, I've got power. Tested this by hitting pads, um, and all that stuff. But if I don't have the opportunity to do it, right, then this might present a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I was thinking because a lo- I I haven't been on Reddit or YouTube as much as I was in the beginning when we first started because I came in for mm, in the beginning it was for self-defense. I was in uh altercation where I froze and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to read the situation, or even if I did know how to read the situation, even with my background of like boxing or whatever, or karate, or even just the base Wing Chun that I learned, my first thought was to freeze. And then if I froze, then if something did happen, let's say the guy did strike me, I felt like I would just go into my animal instinct, like just to like either grab, punch, like haymaker or whatever. So when you say like, I get what you're saying when it comes to like driving, that's a perfect example. But for people that aren't used to like more traditional arts and just see like MMA or competition, um, combat sports, they see that and they're like, oh, well, that works. How can I assume that your stuff's going to work if you can't do what we do? Does that make any sense? Like, I'm just trying to like have a clearer picture of like how the neural system, because when I'm driving, I drive in the parking lot when I was a kid. And then the next step was to drive on the street.
It's
And then the
progression.
next step, it was the progression.
Yeah,
Now we can't just go like, unless you're an asshole, you can't just go on the street and it's like, hey, I choose you. Like, um, I have to progress. So first see if I can beat up a little kid. We're not condoning this at all, but it's like, how can you know the levels of progression for our stuff, especially since we don't have a belt system or a form of like, or even like even if we don't talk modern, like teachers or shifus teaching their students, like even in the past where Hitman or Wan Shan, I think I butchered his name, but or any of like the other like traditional martial artists, like how will their students know, like, teacher, am I good enough? You know, if we're not going, like, I think Bruce, he was like, I want to test my shit, and he would challenge people. But we can't just do that nowadays where we just like challenge people in the streets because one, you'll probably go to jail
you
or
get
you'll get
sued
seriously
probably,
hurt, you
or
know?
yeah, yeah. Well, I
So
mean,
how would you explain the progression system, a clear, like a progression system from our stuff versus a clear progression system through like BJJ or karate or something where like you someone tells you like, hey, you've gotten this belt because you can do XYZ, you know?
well, there that is a lot to
I just word
unpack.
vomit. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no, I mean that is a lot, but let me see if I can kind of tackle some of it.
Hmm.
Um, Kind of like, what my teacher says, anybody can beat anybody at any given time, right? So there is, I don't think that there's ever for a guarantee, because it all has to do, it doesn't matter how good you are as a martial artist, how skilled you are, because there's other factors, right?
Mm,
And I think that that's what is, when I hear people talk about self-defense, I think that's what's ignored a lot of the time.
mm,
When I hear about people, they do training and they become very skilled martial artists. um, that can be very helpful for self-defense, but it also can kind of have nothing to do with it, right?
mm,
Because let's say you're a skilled martial artist, but you're just not paying attention. Like being skilled at martial arts doesn't mean you have like strong situational awareness skills. Not necessarily. You can be good at other stuff because there's a lot of different things for somebody to be good at, right? And also, what you were saying about belts. I think different. I have pretty limited experience with this, but I think different schools give belts for different things. But if a school
right.
was to tell you, like, oh, this belt is because you have this amount of ability to defend yourself, it's like maybe a little bit suspect, right?
Mm,
I mean, it's so, I wish it was like an easier answer, but I don't really think it is, right? Because you could be very skilled and a guy could be completely unskilled, but he pulls out a knife, right?
yeah.
And then, you know, let's say you're not able to deal with the knife. That doesn't mean you're not skilled, just means that he's doing something you're not familiar with.
Mm,
So, I think identifying scenarios that you in particular might be at risk for, if that's a concern of yours, and then specifically training those scenarios. You talked about the freeze response that you had, and that's like really natural, right? I mean, you have
Hmm.
fight, flight, or freeze, and it's like it can be very difficult to um, get past those things. But I think, you know, if you're training a lot, I think that's really helpful. I mean, people have different ideas of it, right? Like people sometimes do like ultra realistic scenario training, which I'm not. I can see there's benefits because literally your body and your adrenals and everything thinks it's real. So if you're doing this type of like high intensity, realistic scenario training, but for me personally, I think it's like it's kind of hurtful, right?
Mm.
Because your body literally can't tell the difference. So you're kind of going into this state where you're actually being ambushed, or you're actually, going through this kind of scenario, and it becomes extremely dangerous because it's uncontrolled,
Mm.
right? Especially when we're doing the things that we do, which is like, a lot of like soft targets, groin, throat, eyes, and stuff. And
Right.
that's literally what we train. If you say, okay, well, let's have a scenario where a guy's going to ambush me, and then I'm expected to like use the stuff that I train, it's like super dangerous. I mean, you can say, oh, okay, I can put on like goggles, and I can
Mm.
wear like a protective suit, like one of those $3,000 protective, like full body friggin'
Yeah.
protective suits, or whatever. You can kind of, but I don't know. It doesn't sit well with me because it's literally just so dangerous. Like I've done drills where I've had like, you know Tim, he was, my student. He's wearing like this visor to protect his eyes, and
Right.
I'm doing a demonstration, and I go in for like a finger jab, and the my finger slips up underneath
Oh wow.
of the of the goggles, and I pulled it, obviously, right? I mean, I felt that, and I pulled it, but there's no safe way of doing it, right? Because I mean, maybe, yeah, maybe the guy has a motorcycle helmet, or I don't know, something, but it's just, I don't really like that way of training, right? I
Hmm.
don't like the way that it taxes you, like your adrenals, and I don't like the way that it kind of makes you feel, because you're going to be kind of in a really like a fight or flight state, right? Like if I go into a room and I'm kind of like, okay, some guys are going to like ambush me, like I'm feeling this,
Right.
right? And I want, my practice, as much as there's two sides, right? As much as I want my stuff to be practical and to work for self-defense, I also don't want to be running around like kind of in this hyper aroused in like state all the time,
Right.
right? Um, so there's that other, kind of the other way, which is kind of like the way that I like looking at it, which is developing skill, right? And
Hmm.
you've heard me use kind of the analogy of like an archer, right?
Yeah.
Where you have somebody, and I don't know anything about archery. I'm just like making this up. But this is like where you have a guy and he gets really, really skilled at like shooting targets,
Right.
right? And he's like quick on the draw. He's got precision. When he starts out, the progression is first you start out and you shoot a stationary target, right? And you
Hmm.
take as much time as you need, right? Next, maybe, I don't know, you have either, let's say, a moving target. So it's moving maybe just a little bit. And then now you can take your time and shoot and get good at that. And then maybe it's you have multiple stationary targets and then multiple moving targets. And you can scale it up however you like, but that's the principle, is you start out um, with something simple and you
Right.
increase it, right? And you notice this guy, I'm assuming, that's learning this archery, he's not really under pressure, at least not in the beginning, you know,
Hmm.
in the sense that there's no one trying to hack his head off while he tries to shoot his
Right.
arrows, right? Eventually, in like old school times, that's what you'd have to deal with, right? if you were an archer, you'd have to deal with, okay, I have to hit my targets and stuff as, the other army is coming and trying to kill me, right?
Right.
But you can't train that way. I mean, I don't think you can train. I think it'd be very, very difficult to train that way because how can you get good at something when you've got all this stress,
Mm.
right? You've got all this stuff that's like literally imagine that, okay, you're trying to learn how to shoot, and like every once in a while a guy just comes along and tries to like smite you or something. Like
Right.
you can learn in that environment. That doesn't mean it's not useful, but you need
Hmm.
a progression, like kind of as you were saying, you need a progression. So, in my mind, it's like when I see in combat sports, they tend to start sparring very early, right? In
Hmm.
my experience that I've seen. So there's a good and bad side, right? So I think their argument would be, well, sparring is realistic, sparring is good. You're dealing with a opponent that is live, so that they're moving, adjusting, and you're having to move and adjust and all this, which is good. Um, but I think the kind of downside of that is, um, potentially you're putting yourself in a situation where you yourself are experiencing a lot of fear, right? Which
Mm.
is natural, um, but also, I think the counter argument is, well, you would want to kind of like be able to face that fear and kind of get over it, which is a good argument. But the problem is, you go back to the archery example. I'm trying to learn this precise stuff, which is great and works really well. Um, how can I do this when I'm like fearing for my life that somebody is throwing all this shit? Wouldn't it make more sense if I spent time on my own developing my skill? So now I'm good at archery, right? Now I can hit moving targets. I can do trick shots. I can do all this cool stuff, with precision and with skill. I've developed skill. Now at this point, somebody could come along and say, "Hey, it's great that you can do all that, but maybe now you should try to. We're going to attack you, or we're going to throw stuff at you or something, and now you're going to have to learn to do all that again while under this type of live pressure,
Mm.
right?"
Right.
And that to me makes a lot more sense as a progression. Um, and that is also why when you look at traditional martial arts, these things are not like 2-year affairs. These things are like 20-year affairs, right?
Yeah.
It's like, or a lifetime,
Hmm.
right? It's the slow route. And there's, this isn't really about sport fighting, but I've heard the argument, like I've heard like Joe Rogan say, um, you know, that he thinks that traditional martial arts are a shortcut,
Hmm.
right? Or that he thinks that people think that. And I'm
Ah.
and I've heard him say that, right? And when I hear that, I'm like, what are you talking about? If anything, it's the long route,
Right.
right? I'm not just jumping in with like four moves that I learned like 2 weeks ago, and now I'm trying to spar and beat the hell out of this guy or whatever. I mean, that's like, it is good on one level, but on another level, it's like some of the stuff that we're trying to develop takes, even without having people attack us, it's difficult to do. And
Right.
that's another reason why, you know, you never see anybody capable, or you rarely see anybody capable of using this stuff, because it's, even without the pressure, it's difficult to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh
Some
no,
some some of
absolutely.
the, some of the things that we do, right? But does it being difficult to do mean that we shouldn't pursue it? I don't think
Mm-mm.
so.
Right.
I personally don't think so. I mean, there's that's the journey of becoming a martial artist, right? And not everything is about the fastest way to take somebody out, although that is good to learn as well,
Hmm.
right? I don't know. Did I kind of like address some of your questions there, or?
Oh no, you definitely do address the because my questions were around neurosystem and the difference between like progression. And it seems like, as you're saying, like it all comes down to like neural system and skill. You download the skill, like you practice the skill well enough that it's ingrained in your body. And using the archery example was perfect. And even the car example, and it made me think of when you're driving a car, you progress from parking lot, street, highway, and now you're doing interstate travel. The entire time, yeah, you're dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, but you want to be calm because you don't the event for like the stressful event, as you said, like archery, someone's trying to hack your head. A perfectly modern example is you're about to get in an accident. How like is your are you stressed? Like are your adrenaline like no one trains you. You're not training for the accident. You're training to be able to either avoid getting hurt, seriously hurt, getting out of the situation. If it's an accident, reduce minimal damage. And you can translate that to modern day if you're in combat, like if something not combat, altercation or you encounter violence. You
Yeah.
train enough so the skill is in you to mitigate skill, get out of the situation as fast as possible, but you don't expect it to happen every day.
I think a good example, like I ride a motorcycle,
Mhm.
and this is an example of a high stress, kind of dangerous situation. And I think that if I use that as an analogy, there's two distinct skills. Like the skill of riding, right? Kind of yourself. Like so, imagine there's nobody around, and you're just kind of riding yourself. You have your own skills that you need to develop, right? The skill of riding and the skill of riding, with other people around, and having to navigate and deal with the stuff that they're doing. Somebody cuts you off or somebody's doing something they shouldn't be doing. The way that you deal with that, these are two separate skills,
Mhm.
right? And
Right.
like if you're the type of person who, let's say you didn't develop a lot of skill riding, like for me, I wouldn't say that I'm like a super skilled rider. Like
Mhm.
I have maybe moderate skill, but I've spent more. Like I just do it for. I don't really. I'm not like super interested in it. It's just my vehicle of choice.
Right.
Um,
Transportation. Right.
yeah, transportation exactly. So I haven't. I'm not super passionate. I haven't spent a lot of time developing the skill of riding. But I would say I have maybe like moderate, adequate level stuff. Um, but my ability to drive with other people or to ride with other people, I think is good because I spent a lot of time kind of doing that. But they're two different skills. Definitely, if I spent more time developing my skills, I would be I would be better off. And it's the same thing when we talk about martial art or combat, right? You have your own stuff. I don't think this is like maybe looked at enough or that I've seen. It's like you're a samurai and you're practicing like 10,000 cuts a day. You know, you're not worried about like how the other guy is going to react when you're practicing your 10,000 cuts. You're just practicing 10,000 cuts. You're developing your skill, right?
Mhm.
And then sparring or engaging or dealing with other people, this is a separate thing. But would you agree that that the guy that practices his own skill, that has a lot more skill, is going to do a lot better um, against somebody else later when they decide to train it? But then,
Mhm.
maybe the other problem is that some people kind of just do it on their own and they never go out and experience um, what it's like to have pressure, like to have a live opponent kind of um, like go at them, and they've never experienced that. So, you know, you got to have both,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I think you got to have both. But that being said, I think a lot of people would disagree with me on this, and I don't really know why. Because if you think about it for a second, it's fairly clear. Let's say you're very, very, very skilled at, I don't know, a throat punch. Let's say
Right.
so you've trained it for the 1,000 cuts, 10,000 cuts. You've done, um, you know, you've trained this so much. You look in the mirror. There's no telegraph, right? People can't see it coming, and it's like on or off, right? And
Hmm.
maybe you do something like this, and so this is a shape that maybe you don't need a ton of power, but just the shape of the fist into this area maybe is debilitating, right? And so you're very, very, very good at this, and then you end up in a situation where, for whatever reason, you must protect your life.
Hmm.
So you throw this throat shot, right? And the guy doesn't see it coming. He doesn't see it coming because you've trained to have like very little telegraph, right?
Hmm.
And you've trained the correct structures, you have skill, blah, 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 blah. So you hit him in the throat, he goes, and then he goes down, right?
Right.
So did that person really need to engage in sparring or, you know, all that stuff, like engage with another person? Would it have even been considered like a waste of time, considering
Mm.
what he did end up training? It worked, right? In this
Right.
hypothetical situation, right?
Right.
Because he was that good at what he does,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's simple and it's efficient and it's direct, right? These are like core principles of Wing Chun, for example. Um, and so let's have a different scenario, right? Like a different hypothetical, or modify the scenario. Let's say that it's the same guy. He's trained this one thing, and then he throws this shot, but he fumbles it, or the other guy is, I don't know, has very, very good reflexes, very, very good awareness and all that, and suddenly, he, I don't know, steps out of the way or something and throws some counter punch or something.
Hmm.
So now it's a fight, right?
Right.
This guy that has spent tens of thousands of hours training his throat punch is screwed now if that's all he's done,
Mm.
because now he can't really respond. He doesn't know what to do. He's never been hit because let's say he's never sparred, or he's never he's never trained with others, let's say. So
Hmm.
um, now his adrenaline's up. He's getting hit. He doesn't know what to do about it. He can no longer throw his one awesome move, this throat punch, because uh, newsflash, the guy is a person. And like
Right.
let him do what he wanted to do, right?
Right.
And so in that scenario, it's like, if that were to happen, obviously this is why you had to train multiple stuff.
Mm. Right.
You have to have different, I shouldn't say multiple stuff, but different types of training, right?
Hmm.
Like just that one throat punch thing maybe isn't enough, you know. But it really depends on who you are, what you need, and what happens to you, and like what you're at risk for. Because maybe 9 times out of 10, maybe that is enough.
Hmm.
And depending on your inclination, you know, you can kind of ask yourself, like, am I okay with the potential that if something goes wrong, I can't do anything about it?
Right.
Yeah, that's up to you, right? Everybody's got different goals.
Mm.
But the fact of the
Right.
matter, the fact of the matter is, if you have to, um, training and kind of controlling a live person is like the hardest thing that you can do,
Hmm.
right? I mean,
Right.
it really is. And for you to try to do techniques or things like that, especially anything that's even remotely complex against a live person, especially if this live person is trying to hurt you, this is like the most difficult thing that you could possibly do,
Gotcha.
right?
Gotcha. Yeah. So, I mean, that answered a lot of my questions. I got some other things I'd love to ask you about, but regarding neurosystem progression, it seems like it's two paths with the progression, but it really comes down, what are your goals? And also, do you really need to do those things? But probably in a future episode, we'll go deeper down into sparring, or like goals of like self-defense. I would love to hear that. But guys, what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And anything else you want to say, Sifu?
Uh, no, I think the I've said a lot. Yeah.
All right. Well, probably, sorry to hold you, but yeah, guys, let us know what you guys think about it. We love to hear the feedback. But yeah, see you guys.
All
Take
right.
care.